So welcome to this edition of the Moodie Davitt Video View. I'm Dermot Davitt. I'm here at London Heathrow Airport Terminal 2, where I'm walking and talking travel retail with Heathrow Retail Director Fraser Brown. And we're talking about traffic, passengers, appetite to spend, key pillars on which retail at Heathrow is built, food and beverage, and of course the challenges of the government's VAT rules. And we encompass all that in this walk and talk tour, which I hope you'll enjoy. Delighted to be here, Fraser. My first trip of the year. We're in early January 2024 and looking forward to a big year ahead, and obviously good to be here with you.
Well, firstly, welcome and Happy New Year as well to you and to all the people in Moodie Davitt and watching this. It is going to be a busy year. It's going to be our busiest year ever at Heathrow. So we are predicting that we're going to welcome 81.4 million passengers this year, on the back of a great 2023 as well.
Yeah.
We finished the year just over 79 million passengers, 98% of that fabled 2019. So I think we're almost ready to park the 2019 and the pre-COVID one. We're back in growth. We've had the best growth of any hub, I think, in the world, and certainly the European ones, including places like Istanbul, which saw great growth before COVID. So in a traffic sense, we're really, really happy. And as you can see, and we'll see as we walk around today, the terminal, and we could have gone to T3, 5 or 4 as well. They're vibrant, they're buzzy. Team have done a great job with both the food and beverage and the retail. We'll talk about that, and as well as a bit of digital. But there are some headwinds as well, and I don't want to be gloomy and grumpy so early in January, but we do need to be a little bit careful around how we navigate the business. But certainly from a traffic point of view, we're in a great place.
Okay, good. So look, our plan today is to walk around T2, see some of the new projects that are happening, talk about the wider picture at Heathrow, talk about the environment for trading as Heathrow, as Fraser also mentioned, and to look at, again, some of those headwinds as we go along. Maybe just as we walk and talk, obviously last year we discussed the return of some of the key nationalities as well. You're expecting, I guess, those Chinese, Indians and others, and that connectivity to continue to improve as we go through 24 as well?
Yeah, we did, and we talked about this in the context of particularly, let's take those two countries, you know, the largest countries by population in the world, India having recently overtaken China. Here in Terminal 2, Indian travellers make up an important part of the mix. And, you know, for Heathrow, one of our successes is our global reach. And if we just take India for a moment, and we take Europe as we've talked about, 3/4 of all the flights to India from Europe come from this single airport. And that's testament to the work that my colleagues have done working with the airlines, and the airlines work themselves. But it shows how strong the aviation demand is in London and in the UK. And that's really great, because obviously, as we know in travel retail, Indians are good spenders, particularly good spenders on categories such as alcohol, for example. And, you know, as we go downstairs, you will see in the main duty-free store with our operator, Revolta, you know, exciting things with brands like Diageo with their Johnny Walker Blue Label. We'll see with Moët and Hennessy, again operated by our duty-free operator, Revolta, a great standalone Glenmorangie store that we opened last year. Those are good examples of the team working with the brands, the retailer, to make sure that we curate the offer properly. You know, good travel retail stuff. That hasn't changed in 2023 or now in 2024. If we turn to China, Chinese traffic at Heathrow is back. And I'm not going to qualify that statement at all. So, you know, we had 12 destinations to mainland China before the pandemic. We've got 12 today. We had about 80 flights a week before the pandemic. We've got 80 flights today. It's not our largest market, clearly, in volume terms, but we all know the value to travel retail of the Chinese traveller. But here's one of the headwinds that we've talked about. Those Chinese travellers were big purchasers in luxury, big purchasers in cosmetics, big purchasers in skincare. They have come back, as I say, unequivocally, but they are not spending. And you've heard me say before, and unfortunately the situation as we into 2024 hasn't changed, the fact that the UK government requires us to charge VAT to those passengers, and indeed to all our passengers, for those types of goods, where every other country pretty much in the world doesn't, is an absolute act of economic kind of vandalism to the business that we've got. We've described it as a tourist tax, and that's one of the things that continues to be a significant headwind, Dermot. And where we are today is we're obviously trying to work really hard with the brands, with the retailers, to do the best we possibly can. But the reality is, although the stores are open, although the brands are still here, the economic activity is smaller. And that economic activity has been exported to the likes of France, Italy and Spain. And we've seen that in the numbers. You know, operators such as Global Blue, who track credit card spend and VAT refunds, are seeing fantastic growth in France, in Italy and in Spain. And that growth is to the detriment of the UK, not just here at Heathrow, but you know, my colleagues in travel retail, with the high street businesses, the businesses like Bicester, Central London, but equally regional airports, regional cities where there's lots of inbound tourism in the UK, places, my hometown of Edinburgh, but places like Oxford and Cambridge as well. So it's a real headwind, and we call again on the government. They've got another opportunity in 2 months' time on the 6th of March, when the Chancellor, the Finance Minister of the UK government, makes his budget to change the policy, to bring back, which is what we're asking for, VAT-free in airports and ports, and to kind of further starting on a proper digital VAT refund scheme for high street retailers. High street retailers, you know, like JD Sports, who we've welcomed here, you know, they could be selling a lot more in their Oxford Street store, they could be selling more in their Edinburgh Princes Street store to tourists if they were able to offer VAT-free.
Yeah, and so that's obviously perhaps the biggest issue, one of the biggest issues facing you in terms of the spending patterns that you're seeing here at the airport. Again, as you say, calling on the government to act very soon. March the 6th is the big date.
It is, and what we're not asking for here, just on that one point, is we're not asking for special treatment, we're not asking for a handout. What we're asking for is a level playing field. We're asking for our government in the UK to recognise that we're in an internationally competitive market and we need tax policy that's internationally competitive, and sadly we don't have that.
Yeah.
As we're here, just looking around, you can see some of those high street businesses that I just referred to. So we've got Ted Baker Accessorise. JD Sport is one of the businesses that we brought back actually. When you and I last walked around here in 2021, it was just coming into construction. And what we're trying to do with those businesses is have a pricing policy recognising the VAT challenge that is still attractive to passengers. So those businesses will have their full high street offer, so it's not outlet range, it's the latest stock, but they will be offering it to passengers, or they are offering it to passengers at 10% off. So that's one of the examples in terms of how we work with pricing around the categories to try to make ourselves competitive in this post-tax environment. We very much hope that the government finally listens and changes the policy, but of course as a responsible business, I need to work with the team and with the partners with the set of rules that we've got, whether we like them or not, and I've clearly stated we don't. But doing things like that is really important. Working on the food and beverage sense with a brand in front of us here like Pret to make sure that they charge a fair price for a very high quality product that consumers recognise in the food and beverage category is important. Working with WH Smith and their InMotion tech brand behind us, or in front of us rather, again, to make sure that they've got, you know, leading prices and leading brands is so important. But it is fair to say on pricing that it is difficult to communicate. You know, what I've just described to you, and you and I should know what we're talking about in travel retail, but to the passenger that's around us, trying to communicate that nuanced message about 10% off on high street, market leading prices on tech, fair, you know, value pricing on food and beverage, before we even get to talking about alcohol and tobacco still being duty free and the value that we're investing in beauty. It's a very complicated pricing landscape. So one of the challenges I have with my colleague who looks after marketing and digital at the airport is how the heck do we tell people about that? It's quite tricky.
Yeah, and there's no such thing, as we said before, as a one price system anymore. You've got obviously duty free on its own, but again, the issue around VAT in many locations here in across the fashion to beauty to tech ranges.
Exactly,
it exists,
and you can see. Sorry to cut. And you can see if we just pan around here, you know what one of our retailers, as I say, like W. Smith, is doing, trying to be very clear at the front of the store. We'll beat, you know, Currys, John Lewis, Argos, you know, UK domestic retailers, trying to be really clear on their pricing. But it is difficult because that's one message that they're going to give, but it's a very different message to what you might have to give elsewhere. And it is incredibly complicated. You're absolutely right.
Yeah, and of course, all of this, you're working in an environment where, frankly, the profitability of the airport company, the non-aero performance feeds very much into that overall. And so VAT and those other factors that you mentioned, other dynamics as well, and we'll come to maybe a few others afterwards, really feeds very directly into that, of course, and puts pressure on your team and, of course, your partners.
Of course, and one of the challenges you asked about headwinds, you know, this is fundamentally, there's two. One is the VAT position, but the second thing is, although traffic growth is great, we've not got any terminal expansion plans. You know, we're a privately funded, privately owned enterprise. Any of the capital that we do has to be funded by ourselves or working with our partners to fund. So as we welcome, and we're pleased to welcome, as I say, more passengers, this year, as I said at the start, will be a record year with 81.4 million. We're having to, at peak time, squeeze them into our existing capacity. So one of the challenges that I've been talking to with our retail partners, with the brands, is how do we make sure that we're as productive as we possibly can be? Because actually, not only are we having to deal with a record number of passengers with their existing footprint, but actually on the margin, we're losing a little bit of space, because as you and I walk through security today, we were chatting about the fact that our security program, as with all other UK airports, is ongoing, very much live, to move to the new security equipment that you don't need to take your laptop out, don't need to take your liquids out, which is great from a passenger service point of view, but is actually quite space hungry. So in Terminal 5 and in a little bit of Terminal 3 and in Terminal 4, we're having to, on the margin, eat into some of our commercial space. If I was in Terminal 5 today, I would show you a food and beverage unit and a foreign exchange unit, which is shut, literally, over the weekend, as our colleagues in security start to build out that. And that means actually not only are we having to deliver more passengers with the same space, but marginally less. So that productivity discussion with the brands and the retailers is critical. So looking at their ranging, whether it be in this InMotion Tech store or in that JD Sports store, so that they're on top of their game, is really important, Dermot, and that's what the team are focused on.
And just to come back to that security change point, that's coming, much of it by June this year, or some of it at least, and then over a period will be implemented. And then are there, beyond the change in the rules, any other implications for commercial that you can see from this? Obviously, the space issue that you mentioned is probably the big one.
So our security program is one of the two big programs that we're spending money on, getting that private capital over the next 3 years. We're actually putting in a new baggage system here for Terminal 2. We're stealing the baggage system at the moment from the old Terminal 1, so when you process your bag, it goes across to T1, comes back. So that's nearly £1 billion. And the security program you touched on is 146 security lanes. So that's the lanes that you and I went through as colleagues and visitors today, as well as the ones that you would go through as passengers, and as well as the ones you would go through in the perimeter if you were perhaps going directly onto an aircraft as a flight crew. All of that needs to change over the next couple of years. We've already started. So if I was in T3 today, we've substantively changed the terminal around, particularly landside, to accommodate that. Terminal 5 is starting, and if you're a passenger today, in all of the terminals, you may well go through one of the new equipment, because we've been trialling it already. So it's not a question of starting from zero. We're very much up and running with the program. A lot of it will be changed by the time we get to the summer, but inevitably that will roll into the back end of the year and into next year, as is other airports. You know, if you were down the road at Gatwick or up the road in Birmingham, it would be the same thing. So we're working with the government because we recognise that we want to deliver this as quickly as possible, because benefits for the passenger are there. But we need to be sensible about how we deliver it. The whole industry is trying to do it at once, and the equipment is similar, and it's a bit of a challenge, but it's coming quickly. And for us commercially, that challenge is it does, as I say, eat into a wee bit of space. So we're going to have to work with the brands and the retailers to be as productive as we possibly can, because you mentioned there the economics. We're regulated. So although we're a private company, we're actually economically regulated by the UK's aviation regulator, the Civil Aviation Authority. And actually they've mandated that our price that we charge to our airlines in real terms is about 20% lower this year than it was last year. And like adding up the budget, if you take from one, you have to try to substitute.
Yeah.
So the pressure is on my team, the brands, the retailers, to say, how are we going to do the best we can to mitigate that loss of revenue from our airline partners here into the commercial revenues, which means that the shoppers behind us, the passengers behind us, we need to entice them to spend like they've never done before. And that's difficult on any day, and it's quite quiet today in early January. It becomes even more difficult on a busy day, a UK holiday peak like an Easter or summer or whatever. So that's the challenge that we're facing with the brands, with this VAT kind of cloud in the background all the time as well.
So we've moved now, Fraser, from the mezzanine level down to the ground floor level where many of the boarding gates are and the boarding takes place. A lot happening here. I should also note, as you did to me, that we're now in the 10th anniversary year for Terminal 2, so some refreshments needed, and we're seeing a reasonable amount of that happening right now, or beginning to happen right now. So maybe just take us through what newness is going to look like in 2024 for Terminal 2 first, and we'll talk about the other terminals after that.
Of course, and you're absolutely right, well remembered. So 2014 is when this terminal opened, so it is getting on for 10 years old when we get to June. So starting with refreshing, let's refresh in the refreshment category of food and beverage. So above us, we're taking out, or we have taken out already, as we saw, a big food and beverage unit operated by the restaurant group, and that's going to change into another exciting new brand for the airport run by them called Jones the Grocer. So that's important to do. And in the F&B context, we'll see in a second as we wander around some new stuff at this level as well. But more generally, when we go back to pre-pandemic, and I use that not because I'm obsessed with pre-pandemic, but it's pre-VAT.
Yeah.
And pre-VAT, at Heathrow, we were doing in 2019, or we did 23 refits and refurbishments in a year. So that's quite a scale of activity. Last year, in 2023, we did 36. So almost 50% more. And the plan this year, and those plans, as you know, always change, so we can't be exact, but I would expect us to be doing in the order of 30 to 35 again this year. Okay. So ferocious activity on the part of our team. You can see bits of hoarding behind us, and we'll see that as we go around. Ferocious activity and investment on behalf of the brands and the retailers as well. So it's important for me to say we really value, and I personally really value the confidence and the investment that's coming from those brands and those retailers, particularly in an environment where we know it's not as lucrative for those brands and retailers because of the tax thing that we said. But it's great to refresh it, and actually it's more important now that we refresh it because we don't have that same price lever. We need to be great on service. The execution in store needs to be great. The fit out needs to be great. So the brands and the retailers need to work even more hard, or even harder rather, and therefore getting those fit outs right is great. But it means the intensity of activity is greater. And there's a wee challenge for us around making sure then that we're as quick as we can on those refits, because of course a shop shut is a shop that's not earning revenue, and equally for passengers it's an experience that they're missing. Nobody wants to go past a piece of hoarding from a service point of view either, so it's really important that we get that. So if we're looking, just in front of us, this opened back in August. This is the Glenmorangie store with run by a Volta, obviously the Moët and Hennessy brand. It's our second standalone single brand whisky store. We've got the McCallum store, which has been very successful in Terminal 5, so that's great. Looking around to my right hand side then, we've got some hoarding up here now already. So we've closed down our Caviar House seafood bar, very successful brand that we've worked with for a while, but we wanted to kind of take the concept on a bit. So working with the SSP group, we're going to be opening a new wine bar area and everything called the Vinery in the next next few weeks. So that's exciting. Brings a bit of refresh to this, big area. And just while we're here, actually, one thing we've talked about before, you and I, is the experiential bit and the role that JC Decaux play in what I refer to as the quaternity, taking Martin's Trinity onto the next level. And you can see the Rabanne advertising there from the Puig Group continuing to be incredibly successful. That's one of our most successful experiential sites. And this year, within those 30 changes that we would anticipate, 30 to 35, 12 of them, Dermot, will be some of those experientials.
Okay.
And that's quite a challenge, but I see it as a trend where consumers are looking for freshness, and the challenge that we've got as airport operators working in that quaternity, so with the brand, with the retailer, and indeed with ourselves, is to say, and JC Decaux is to say, we need to do things faster. So the turn rate of these units, you can't just put something in and pay it back over 2 years now. You've got to pay it back over 12 weeks. So we've got to be a bit more innovative about what we build, how we build it. And again, back to my intensity point, how intense we then trade it when it is open.
Yeah, so you're taking those a lot more spaces then that are going to be purely experiential, but talking short-term leases, trying new things, I suppose, is also part of the
absolutely.
trial and error element.
And I always say to the team, we'll do trial and error, and if it's error, the only person that gets fired is me. And I've managed to avoid that so far. We'll see how it goes in 2024, but absolutely trial and error is so important in it. And you can see that idea of experiential in domestic shopping malls as well. If you go into a domestic shopping mall or indeed a domestic high street, you can see the placemaking and the idea that people are wanting newness, freshness, something different.
Yep.
Now, as we walk here on our left-hand side, what we see is a large amount of hoarding. This is our single biggest site, which is currently in construction. I was going to be coy and say, something maybe luxurious is coming, but the LVMH group have told us exactly what's coming. So we're very excited to welcome. We've got a long-standing relationship with the LVMH group and with Louis Vuitton as their most successful brand, and they're coming to T2. That'll be sometime in Q2. It's a new concept for them, and I thank them for their confidence in us, particularly, as I say, in that backdrop of the challenge of VAT. But what I will say, we touched on it before, is sadly, although we're excited to welcome them, we're not welcoming them as an airport on the terms that I would like to see. And that's a reflection of the fact that despite a great job I know they will do, both in building it, operating it, and delivering a great service, the fact that it is VAT paid means that they won't be able to sell as much as they otherwise would, which means they can't afford to pay me as much as I would like as well. So the lights are going to be on, but that economic activity will not be as great as it could be.
Yes, and I guess it's interesting the conversations you're having with brands such as Louis Vuitton, many others as well, that they're still prepared under those terms and conditions where perhaps the trading environment isn't what it could be and maybe should be from your point of view, but they're still prepared to come to Heathrow, and it's still an attractive location for many of those fashion brands who, even under those circumstances, want to be here.
And what I think I would say is, we're not complacent about that. I think I would add they're prepared to come at the moment. And I think we've got to be incredibly careful. And I say this to my team, but particularly I say it to the British government, because we are managing, and it's great credit to my team and to those brands who can continue to invest in this uncertain environment. But it is not a guarantee and it's not a given. Yeah. So we need to be very careful. At the moment, they're still coming. As I say, not on the same terms. So it is not all fine. There is something to see, and there's something to see, yes, as activity, but there's something to see is also a lack of sales. And therefore, it's still a fundamental problem for us. So what I said before about VAT absolutely stands. It's consistent. But you are right. They are at the moment still coming. Why are they doing that? Well, when we speak to them, firstly, London is still a great global city and they want to showcase their brand in London. Heathrow is the UK's hub airport, so linked to that, London and UK, they want to be here. Yep. And we've still, despite this terminal being 10 years old, we've still created a fantastic environment which they can put their brand and they can be proud of the adjacencies and what they're seeing around us. So, you know, we've worked hard to achieve that over the 78-year now this year history of Heathrow, and we'll continue to work hard to do it. But you're absolutely right, we can't guarantee it for the future, because in that environment where we're not as tax competitive as other major jurisdictions, there might come a point where these brands say it's just not working for us.
And some have, you know, if we keep walking, I guess
Yes,
we'll see some examples perhaps around the
Indeed. So
concourse
if we look across here, so we've done a major refurbishment in this area of the terminal in Terminal 2. Most of it was delivered just ahead of the summer peak, and we finished it off in the autumn. And directly in front of us is one example where we have removed 2 retail stores. So we had Kate Spade and we had Smyson, the iconic British leather goods. I've got my little Smyson notebook in my pocket, and those would have been here. And what we've done now, working as I said before with SSP and the Starbucks brand, has created an elevated Starbucks. It's a very beautiful, and it does 2 things. One is it's a recognition that we need more food and beverage capacity, as I've talked about a little bit. Secondly, we actually need to generate footfall into this area. The ceiling's not quite finished above us, but it's quite a light and bright area. But actually, it's a little bit of a cul-de-sac, and we needed to draw more passengers in. So having an elevated food and beverage unit like this one from SSP, really important to play that role. And then what we've done is, despite losing the 2 retail offers, which, as I say, is a factor of that VAT thing, we've managed to welcome Kurt Geiger back again. They've refreshed their offer. Hugo Boss, a very popular, very well recognised, particularly in Europe, a kind of upper high street brand. We've welcomed them back into a refreshed store. And we continue our long-standing relationship with the iconic British designer Paul Smith. And we're really happy to see them back in T2 in their same space, but in a beautifully refreshed store. And if we look around to my right now, again, another member of the LVMH family. The family have got a few spots in Terminal 2 now. This used to be a fine watch room.
Yes.
So it was multi-brand watches, and actually working with, we went out to tender, and Tiffany, as part of LVMH Group, have built in their latest store design, I think, a stunning Tiffany store. Great digital. I've often talked about our 4 retail pillars. You've heard me banging on about digital, experience, space and offer. This is a fabulous space. They've used digital. The team inside deliver a great experience, and it is a great offer. It's the Tiffany jewellery is iconic. VAT is still a topic. We wouldn't be in the luxury area if I wasn't talking about VAT, but nonetheless, having a very strong brand like Tiffany is great. And as we sweep around here, more change. So this is a new Burberry and Bottega Veneta store. Burberry was further along. That used to be Burberry. Bottega Veneta's refitted out in here. And then our Gucci store remains, iconic part of the Kering family. And then the final bit here in terms of newness is when we moved Burberry out of their larger store, we've been able to welcome another member of the LVMH family, and that's Dior. So Dior are opening literally, Dermot, in the next few days, and we're really pleased to have them. We've got them in Terminal 5 as well. Passengers really, really like it. The Dior brand is growing incredibly well within the LVMH family, and it's great to have them here. So on the one hand, in that little walk round, you might say, well, Fraser, it's all okay. You know, you've got great luxury brands, and we have. You've got great new fit outs, and we have. But the reality is the team are having to work really hard to do that. And secondly, as I say, unfortunately, the trading levels are not at the level that we saw pre the change in the VAT policy. So that comment I made about the tourist tax and the lights being on and the economic activity being reduced is sadly correct. But I'm really proud of what the team have done in managing to continue to attract these brands. As you and I said, we can't guarantee that will always be the case. But it's great to see it. And for passengers, as you can see, looking back now on what we've just walked, although there's that hoarding there and that Dior bit will come down, you can see the sweep that we've just done it does deliver a great passenger experience, which is what we're all about at Heathrow, trying to deliver the best airport service in the world. And we only do that if we can offer the best airport retail in the world.
And interesting, we spoke about Starbucks taking some space from what was previously boutique space. Do you see that as a trend, perhaps, something that will happen a bit more, just given that food and beverage is so central to service overall at the airport, and you're very conscious, I know, of the change in the mezzanine level here in T2, and in terms of how that might impact service in terms of people being able to get through and have a meal. Where do you see space being taken or moved to, given the constraints that you have on space at the moment across categories?
So I think. So what we will see is not, I wouldn't say it as revolutionary change. There is a small evolution in the space mix. So you're absolutely correct. You will see a little bit more food and beverage. And that example from Starbucks is a good one. Later in the year, I'll be able to take you to Terminal 5 and show you another small change. But it's on the margin changes, Dermot. It's not wholesale, but it is absolutely on the margin. Food and beverage space will grow a little bit, and that's a recognition of the demand for F&B is strong. On the back of the recovery of passengers, what we've seen at Heathrow, and I think other airports have seen it, is a slight increase in dwell time, and we're seeing a dwell time increase probably in the order of 10 or 12% in terms of time in the departure lounge. Naturally, as human beings, the longer you're somewhere increases the propensity for you and I to need to eat, and it's the same for our passengers. So that's one driver of there being a little bit more demand. The other driver of demand is our passenger, a reason for travel has changed slightly, and that's stuck after the pandemic. So we're seeing slightly more people traveling to visit friends and family than we're traveling for business.
Yeah.
And that means that those travelers traveling to visit friends and family are less likely to be traveling in front of a plane, less likely perhaps to have airline status that allows them access to a lounge. So that's another reason from a demand point of view why there might be more people wanting to eat in the main concourse. I chose my words very carefully there because people read that as a change in demographic, and it's not. Just because I'm traveling to see my mother or I'm traveling to see a relative doesn't mean that demographically I'm any better or any worse than if I was traveling on business. But it does create a heightened demand for food and beverage. So across the terminals, we're forensically looking at, do we have enough space? We always start from a space planning point of view to say at Heathrow, and other airports will do the same. What do we need from a peak point of view? How do we make sure we've got enough food and beverage capacity? Then how do we make sure we've got enough essentials retail, the likes of Smith's, Boots and things? How do we get the duty free correct? And then the specials retail comes after. And we plan, as we have done before the pandemic and before the VAT change, we plan that same way. And we can see the need to just insert a little bit more on the margin of food and beverage, so we're doing that. And
we've spoken and walked T2 in terms of change and newness. What about the other terminals in terms of what's coming down the track in 24 across not just F&B but retail and other services?
So across the track, as I said earlier, you know, the intensity overall is higher, so that would be the first thing to say. So you will see, and our passengers will benefit from more change in 24 as a run rate than we would have seen, as I say, before the pandemic, and at the same run rates we did last year. And I think that's a structural change for us. And so I think the kind of travel retail ecosystem, airports, retailers, brands, media owners need to recognize now that consumers, I think we probably, you know, both have kids, their attention span is probably a lot less than we would want. Consumers are a bit more fickle. And we need to recognize as part of the travel retail ecosystem that we need to be more agile, more flexible. And therefore fit out timescales are going to just turn faster. And we've seen that already. So as I said, I would expect us to be doing 30 to 35 changes this year. Some of the highlights of that in T3, we've already taken back some space from the iconic luxury retailer Harrods. That was one of the examples of that VAT position. We agreed very amicably with the Harrods team that, you know, in the new VAT paid environment, they were just not going to be as productive as they would want. or as we would want. And we have a long-standing, over 30-year relationship with the Harrods team. They're great retailers, great at what they do. I'm very, very proud of the relationship, and they do a great job in their main store in Knightsbridge as well. I was in there on the weekend. It's a very, very good store. But it's not working as much as we want, so we've taken space back from them. Their gifting business runs very well. It's less impacted because of the lower price point on VAT. So we've retained the Harrods brand, so you can still pick up your iconic Harrods branded bags,
Yep.
the smaller value gifting food items. It's working incredibly well. But we've taken back space and we've created two new, roughly 100 metre square iconic boutiques. And I can tell you that two international luxury brands will go in there. Can't tell you who they are today. That will become obvious in the next few months. We're still in the contract negotiations. But that's another positive example that the brands are still willing to engage. But as I said, as we walk past the Louis Vuitton hoarding, we can't guarantee that and we can't assume that. So we need to keep working. So that's one example. A lot of the other changes, Dermot, will be driven by that security program that I talked about. So Terminal 4 will see quite a lot of change, and we don't actually know yet the exact shape of that. So a little bit of wait and see. But there's lots and lots and lots, and the volume will be really high. So going back to that Paco Rabanne underneath the flight information screens to over your shoulder there, we'll see more and more of those experientials, particularly on things like the alcohol categories and the beauty categories, the kind of core duty-free almost that we can now see behind us as we've got to the main duty-free store. And we'll see lots more of that as well.
So Fraser, we've arrived at the World's Duty-Free store, operated of course on a long-term basis by Avulta, and a key partner of course for Heathrow Airport. We're going to have a little wander through now and talk a little bit about each of the key categories in here, beginning with beauty. Obviously a key message is around 20% off fragrances, as we can see in the background, and that's something I know you've collaborated on with both the retailer and with the brands under the new VAT rules. So maybe we'll just walk and talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, and I don't want to sound a little bit like a stock record, but that VAT position of the government has meant that it's really important that we do get that message to consumers that we are prepared and they're still going to get great value despite that VAT position. So, having those simple messages, but very hopefully impactful in store is important, but equally getting that message out digitally. So, as I said before, working with my colleagues in Avulta and with my colleagues in Heathrow to make sure that beforehand we give the message to consumers is really, really important. You can see it's quite busy and buzzy today. Team are all here ready to welcome passengers, but it is tough. Working with the brands, making sure we've got the right brands. Avulta do a great job, their category management, doing all of that. But the reality is, consumers in their mind now more and more realise that it's tax paid in the UK and just assume that they're paying the same price as the high street. So we're having to almost start and re-convince them that actually it won't be like that and they will get great value. So it's a difficult bit. So the whole beauty category is difficult. Perfume, we are able to offer some great deals. Avulta have done a great job. So the perfume part of the overall beauty and perfume category is doing a little bit better, but it's still really, really tough. Okay. As we come round here, continue to work with the Avulta team on some of the other categories, the gifting, the confectionery. I was talking to you, I think earlier, as we enter 2024 now, it was the 200th anniversary of Cadbury, iconic British confectionery business, and excited to work with Avulta and with Jaya and his travel retail team within Mondelez to see what they're going to bring us for that as well. So that's exciting to see. To kind of end the duty-free store and the walk around this store on a bit of a more positive note, where the final part of the journey as we walk around here is into the area where we retail the alcohol. And alcohol is a category which obviously does have a tax advantage, both duty and VAT, for anybody travelling internationally. And obviously we have a very small number of domestic passengers, but the vast majority, over 90%, are international. And now we can offer value. So as we come into this area, you will start to see some of the point of sale material very focused on whether it be champagne in front of us with the Moët and Hennessy brands of Moët and Chandon, Veuve Clicquot, driving price, or whether it be more premium for those Indian consumers, which are a big part of the makeup of the brand. We came with Andrew Cowan and his Diageo travel retail team to reopen the T2 Johnny Walker store. They're doing some experiential here today as well with the sub-brand Extraordinaire. And it's great to see the alcohol brands, given the right policy framework, prepared to invest and have the confidence. But it's not as big a category as some of the others. So although it's a good news story to finish the walk in duty free, an increase in the alcohol doesn't make up for the losses that we are suffering as a travel retail business in total in the core categories of luxury and that beauty part that we saw. So we'll take the positive and we respect and recognise that the British government got that right in terms of tax and duty free on alcohol and tobacco, but we call on them again to put it right across the road, as it were, on beauty and in front of us again as we head back towards the luxury area.
Yeah. Now on spirits overall, obviously that's relatively speaking a good news story. How do you see that offer evolving? I mean, clearly there is some investment from the brands here. I mean, Diageo have put in a lot of investment there behind us. Johnny Walker Boutique and obviously the Extraordinaire counter as well. More of that to come. We've been at some of their big high profile events, as we have with Bacardi and other partners as well down the line. You're still seeing that investment through Avolta and with Avolta and with yourselves from
and I think this is a good perhaps bit to look. So in the distance, as you said, Dermot, you've got the Johnny Walker Blue Label, so a premiumisation of the category, but equally right beside us you've got the brands and the price points that you would see in domestic, and we are comparing very clearly on the point of sale, as you can see. So we've got within the category, I think, two distinct parts to alcohol. We've got making sure that we have the brands that consumers would buy and consume in their domestic life, the Bombay Sapphires that we happen to see behind us, or the Tanqueray London Dry Gin, or whatever it is, and that they can get them at the duty and the tax-free price. But at the same time, we work with the brands and with the Avolta to showcase those premium or more unique SKUs within the category, and you need both. So we showed you earlier the Glenmorangie work that we've done. That's about giving Glenmorangie the opportunity to showcase some of their less easy to find parts of their range. Done the same with Macallan at Terminal 5 to great success, and having the shop-in-shops like the Johnny Walker does the same. So I see the alcohol category very much in two kind of parts. The high street standard SKUs and the regular stuff, and making sure that we work with Avolta on having the ranging, having the availability and having the price correct and passing on that advantage. And then secondly, being a great showcase for brands to show the really luxury and newness. And you mentioned there the Bacardi group, their Experience Patron, which we won an award for with Bacardi, with Decor, with Avolta and ourselves in that Quaternity at Terminal 5. I would see us doing more of that. Avolta did a shop-in-shop with Diageo Group in Don Julio as they were elevating the tequila category again. So again, we see more of that. And we think Heathrow is a great place for those brands to tell those stories and engage consumers. We have to be able, as an industry, to demonstrate to consumers that we're passing on the value of tax and duty free. If I take you back in Cannes, actually, it was the Kearney Group that issued a report which clearly showed that consumers are a bit sceptical, to say the least, that the industry is not necessarily passing on the value, and they don't see the value in duty and tax free. We here in the UK have got an example for the whole of travel retail of the danger when actually governments start to believe that you're not passing on the value, and they take that away, and that's what they've done in the UK on the VAT. And actually one of their reasons, as you'll remember, in their analysis of why they did what they did, was they said they weren't clear that the advantage of the VAT free was being passed on. So whilst we retain the advantage on duty and tax of alcohol, I think it's incredibly important that the industry can demonstrate to consumers and to government that we're passing that advantage on. Because if we don't, we have the risk that governments, understandably, will be sceptical and potentially take it away. And we've got that example, as I say, here in the UK. So on the regular stuff, we have to demonstrate. It's not about, it is about commercial things, of course, but it's actually more than that, Dermot. We have to be able to demonstrate that we're passing on that advantage to the consumer. And then on the luxury side, you know, I think if you look at the public statements that the big alcohol groups make in their trading updates to the various markets, they see that premiumization trend in alcohol. And I think most brands talk about above $100 for a price point as premium. We know from the demographics of Heathrow that we're blessed with, that the Heathrow consumer has got deeper pockets. They are very affluent by any measure domestically, and certainly by a travel measure they are very, very good demographically. So it's a great place if you're a Diageo or a Pernod Ricard or any of the big groups, or indeed some of the boutique groups, to showcase your premium products.
So Fraser, we're back on the mezzanine level as we draw to the close of our tour, and we're in front of a relatively new concept for Heathrow, Reserve and Collect. Maybe just tell us a bit about this, and beyond that, where your digital program is going in the commercial sense.
Yeah, well, first off, hope you've enjoyed the little walk we've had, and it is good to bring us to this because we see this as one version of the future, and I'd say one because the shops will be here, but in conjunction with them, as I said as we were walking around, space is going to become an ever increasing problem as the passenger numbers grow, as we would plan this year and hope for future years. With the terminal capacity being kind of fixed, we're going to have to be more and more efficient, and I've mentioned that many times as we've gone round about our productivity. One way we think we can unlock that productivity is doing things like Reserve and Collect. So I often talk, and you hear me talk at conferences, about digital, experience, space and offer. And we've walked around the physical experience today. You've seen how we're changing some of the space. You see how we're changing some of the offers. But the digital element of that, we haven't quite landed yet. So this is, I would say, kind of early pilot. And what you see behind me, I could have equally shown you in Terminal 5, and you'll see coming in Terminal 3 and Terminal 4 this year. And it's a collection point, really.
Yep.
So for people that know in the UK the Argos brand, that kind of idea of being able to shop online and collect something. Now, the idea of click and collect around the world has become quite a familiar piece of language. We're not quite at that stage yet. So this is Reserve and Collect. So you can go on right now to heathrow.com. You can put in your flight. You can say you're going from T2 on Aer Lingus back to Dublin. It will recognise that you're going in the next couple of hours, and it will only show you products that are available in that fulfilment time frame.
Okay. Yeah.
One of the challenges on e-commerce from a domestic point of view is fulfilment. The cost of that DPD delivery or that Federal Express truck. What we can do here for brands is take their stock in to a back of house space. We've got a little bit of back of house space, either back here or downstairs. And what we can then do is, if you order, the two ladies behind us here in the store will get that order in real time on a tablet, go and get you the item, bring it here. And unlike traditional domestic e-commerce, you can touch it and feel it. You can try it on. If it's a piece of clothing, we've actually got a couple of fitting rooms here. So you get the benefit of real physical retail with the range and stock of e-commerce. So what we're trying to do is see how consumers are reacting. But as I say, we're not quite there yet because it's Reserve and Collect, not Click and Collect.
Yep.
So my colleagues are working on the IT upgrades to make sure that you can pay. And there's a whole lot of complicated things behind it around multiple retailers, multiple merchants.
Yep.
How do we divvy the money up, the tax implications and things. So it's quite complicated. But we do believe that this is one version of the future for travel retail where you can have multiple brands with a very, very small shop front and that digital footprint for the passenger.
Yeah, and just in terms of the wider picture for example, e-commerce, which obviously many airports have invested in,
Yep.
and mixed results, I think we could say, as an industry overall. What do you see as sort of the 3 to 5 year plan in terms of what it can become as part of your business, perhaps?
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you what I tell to my colleagues internally, actually. And I've got the grey hair to say I've been around a wee bit now, and I actually started my airport career in airport e-commerce because I started work in our car parking business. And our car parking business, like most airports, is an e-commerce business.
Yeah.
And I think many airport operators kind of almost forget that when they say, oh, well, we don't know how to do e-commerce. Most big airport operators do know how to do e-commerce, either directly or through a car park operator. So it's translating that e-commerce knowledge from car parking. And in Heathrow, we also have our Heathrow Express business where we have e-commerce knowledge, and it's bringing it to retail. But it is more complicated because we are not the brand, which is the distinct part. And getting that right and transitioning the knowledge from parking into the retail bit where you're not the brand is the tricky bit. So the first thing is airports do have some knowledge, so they can go on that journey. And I think the next part to think about then is consumers. Consumers have engaged in e-commerce. They are on your website if you're an airport. You know, the hits on heathrow.com are there. And what we saw in the pandemic, and I think this is one of the changes that has happened, is consumers are engaging with airport and airlines electronically much, much more in all parts of the journey. And what we're seeing is that they are starting to engage more in our retail pages. So yes, they were hitting the website always to say, is my flight on time, which terminal does it go from, etc. The hygiene factor bits of the website, you can argue. But what we saw post-pandemic is they are engaging on, tell me what shops there are, tell me what food and beverage there are. And if you've got that dwell, that digital dwell rather, we all almost obsess about physical dwell, but if you've got that digital dwell, then airports and brands and retailers need to monetize that. And by putting in the right digital offer, you can start to do that, or we think we can. We've not proved it yet, Dermot. We'll see what happens. Come back in 3 and 5 years. But that 3 and 5 year vision, as it were, is to take that digital dwell and try to monetize it for the benefit of the airport, but clearly for the brands and the retailers as well.
Okay. So look, as we wrap up, key messages, I suppose. You know, beginning of 2024, we're here relatively early January, things ramping up, things changing as you've advised us as we walked around. Key messages around how you see 2024 panning out, the opportunities, and perhaps some of the big picture themes that will influence how retail trades at Heathrow over the next few years, not just digital, of course, but of course that physical element too.
Yeah. Let me do that in 2 stages. One is a very specific UK message, which you've heard me talk about, which is VAT. We have to get the VAT rules changed, and we have to go back to an internationally competitive VAT-free scheme at ports and airports in the UK and a high street scheme. And I know that's a very parochial, very specific thing, but that has to be. And for those brand partners and retailers who've been fantastically supportive of that, we need them to continue to do that. And as I say, we've got this key now next decision point in early March on the 6th when the Finance Minister talks. That's one very specific thing. More generally, I think we're positive on traffic. So, as I said, we'll have our biggest year ever. We'll welcome 81.4 million passengers as our forecast. So that's a great starting point for the ecosystem. We've got the footfall. Yeah. We anticipate the footfall is coming. But what we've got to then be careful about is how we present ourselves in both food and beverage and retail to passengers. And it's that traditional, 4 Ps mix of product, price, promotion and place. We've got to get all 4 parts of that right. And the way that we do it, and you've heard me talking about, is that relentless focus on the digital offer, the experience that we deliver in the terminal, how intelligent we use the space, and how we curate the offer correctly, so the right balance of mix. Those 4 retail pillars that we talked about and that the team talk about, they haven't changed. So my message to the industry is continue to engage with Heathrow, continue to engage with my team through that lens of digital experience, space and offer. We need you to be even more efficient than you were before, because with that constrained space and that need to make the space as efficient and as effective as possible, we need the best ranges, the best colleagues in store to deliver the best service if we're going to have the right economic outcomes for the retailers, for the brands and for the airport.
Okay, well, we wish you well on that journey, Fraser, over
Thank
2024, and thanks for welcoming us today.
That's great, thank you very much.